Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to Second and Saints. I'm John Hendrix alongside Ross Jackson, coming at you live on a Sunday evening. We don't have anything better to do, clearly, but we're here to ready to talk about fun Saints stuff. We were in Indianapolis for the week, and so we got a lot of good information for you tonight. Ross, are you recovered yet? I mean, it was a long week.
Yeah. I think coming back on Friday helped out a ton. Got a little bit of rest
Yes,
yesterday and everything. And so
yes.
I'm feeling all good today. How are you, man? You had the
Man,
drive. You did it different
yeah,
than me.
yeah. Look, I said that the other week. I was like, oh, I'm going to make the drive. It wasn't too bad. Look, when I was leaving Indy, it was snowing, so that was
Oh
kind of weird.
wow.
That and it was rain and it fog. So in hindsight, the drive back was way worse than the drive up. So, but it's okay. I got back in one piece clearly. So not a big deal. So, but the combine, man, it was a fun time. Fun
Yeah.
time for everybody. I mean, it's obviously a big deal. Agents are there, scouts, teams. Some teams are kind of some of their prominent figures are skipping this. But
Hmm.
not the Saints. They were repped to the max, right? They had
Yep.
coaches there, they had assistants, they had scouts, they had Mickey was out there, they had Jeff Ireland out there. I mean, it was a gigantic deal, right? And so, it's just kind of crazy that you just go walk and we casually were meeting for, dinner and then there's three position coaches. There's Joe Woods, Marcus Robertson, and then Coach Hodges out there. It's just that's the type of thing where you walk through all these places and you see somebody, and Cam was out there, and we'll
Hmm.
talk plenty about that. But I guess let's get your impressions of the combine. Kind of where your thoughts were of this event. Again, I saw something today that people were talking about. Oh, well, you shouldn't move this from Indianapolis, and I agree because
Yeah.
Indianapolis is a great venue for it. But much like the draft, they could potentially toy with that. But I think from a logistics standpoint, Indy makes the most sense.
Yeah, 100%. Like this is my fourth combine in a row now,
Mm,
and it's been one of those things to where some of it is like, you build the habits, you know where you want to go, you know where you want to be, all that kind of stuff, and so that makes it feel a lot more comfortable. But honestly, like Indy's just a great spot for it. Like the hotel area is really easy. It's all downtown's really accessible. Even with it being in February in a winter city, you have the skywalk, so you actually don't have to step foot outside if you stay at the right place, and then you want to go over to the convention center and everything like that. Like it's fantastic. So and a couple of my favorite places to eat are in Indianapolis. So I really love
mhm.
the area. So that's what I was going to say. My first impression is that it needs to stay in Indianapolis. That's for sure. And I know it's extended there through 2025. We'll see what happens after that. But I hope they don't go the touring road show type of approach like they did with the NFL draft here.
Yeah, that'd be a miss. And it was weird because it was like 75, 80 one day, and then we had
Yeah.
that crazy storm move through, and then it got to like 30s and
Yeah.
25 to 30s, and it
Yeah.
was just insane. But anyways, yeah, I agree with you. I had great food, great times, where everything. I mean, it's just one of those fun things. But of course, this is obviously a big deal for the Saints. This is where obviously we talked about it last week. This is where we learn a lot about this team, right? And
Hmm.
so we're in March. We're actually not that far away from the new league year, March 13th. So, I
Right.
mean, it's what, March 3rd, 10
Yeah.
days.
It's
We're going to be
wild.
talking about Saints free agency and all that. And so I guess we can start about some of the things we heard. And let's just start with free agency, right? So this free agency, the Saints right now, about $17.1 million over the cap, right? And so this is a prime area. They just restructured Cam Jordan. They restructured Cesar Ruiz out there, or at least got the financials there.
Yeah.
So there's still restructures that could be done,
Hmm.
and obviously more are going to be expected because they got to create some space. But with free agency, I don't expect this team to go swing for the fences when it comes to the top tier talent and all that. It's I know fans want to, but I think they're going to employ a strategy similar to what last year that they did.
Yeah, and I think this is a team that's very, very happy with what its roster looks like at the top. I think it's just building out the depth so that you can cover for injury, things like that. I think that they like where they are there, so I wouldn't expect to see them go swing at the top the first 2 days of free agency or anything like that. But I would expect them to be involved pretty early in the second phase, where you're kind of getting the kind of what we would call like mid-level free agents, just speaking contractually, right? Mid-level in terms of financials wise. But you could still get good talent that way. In fact, the Saints have made a habit out of getting and adding good talent to their teams in June, like right before training camp
Yeah.
and everything like that. And so I think this is a team that's always been a little bit, kind of nifty and strategic about the way that they utilize, free agency and how they go around getting some of those deals done. They've got deals with Ryan Ramczyk and Alvin Kamara, Demario Davis that can all be, restructured and open up even more money. So not only should they be able to get compliant with the salary cap, they should be able to find money to spend, but I don't expect them to be pretty aggressive or reckless with that money going into this free agency period.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Demario. Congratulations to him. Just had his
Yeah, baby,
child,
number
right?
8, man.
Yeah, it's
Incredible.
insane.
Story James. What a
Saw that.
name, too.
Yeah, it's a lot of cool personal things. I saw too. Keith Kirkwood just got married,
Yep.
so he had his big old wedding and stuff. So congrats to him. So real fun, exciting times for that. Just want to make sure we mention that. And then it's you mentioned free agency. Um, let's just address it. Anybody that was confused, Michael Thomas is like 99.9% not going to be in a Saints uniform next year, right?
Yeah.
He's going to be a free agent, which creates a really interesting hole for the Saints. I know not many people have talked about wide receiver because we know this team's MO when it comes to the draft that they're probably going to look in the trenches. But with Michael Thomas most assuredly on his way out, you only have Shaheed, Olave, and A.T. Perry. I
Mm-hmm.
like the fact that they got Coach Williams, Keith Williams, or Coach Dub in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about him in a minute, but he's going to bring a lot to the table. But they're going to need a possession receiver one way or another. Your thoughts on Michael Thomas? And, do you agree he's played his last uniform or played his last game as a Saint?
Yeah, I think that that's likely. And, there was some combine chatter around the Baltimore Ravens potentially being a landing spot for him. Of course, the Denver Broncos were brought up a ton because of the connection with he and Sean Payton. I don't know how strong that connection is between he and Sean Payton, but it does exist. I think that when you look at kind of where Michael Thomas is, the writing has been on the wall since they redid that new contract, the incentive heavy contract that included a clause in it that designated him as a post June 1 cut the first day of the 2024 league year, which would be March 13th. That always felt like that was going to be the way that this went. I mean, if he had a fantastic 2023, I guess there's a chance that you would have extended him before that. You didn't. Instead, you had another season to where, unfortunately, he comes up, with an injury that kept him off the field towards the end of the season. And look, the guy has battled and battled and battled to get back out on the field. To me, that's what says the most about him. But I don't know that necessarily he nor the New Orleans Saints are in a situation here to where they can, comfortably move ahead with one another. I think that it's time probably for a fresh start for, Michael Thomas to go and see if maybe things work out better somewhere else. And that seems likely. I think wide receiver is one of those sneaky needs that's maybe becoming a little bit more, even more valuable or even more of a need than, let's say, offensive tackle might be, as we're hearing more positive things about the Saints offensive line and everything. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they go about that. I imagine that's a position that you address over and over and over again. We're used to this team carrying 12 different wide receivers going into training camp. They're starting off with 3. So I expect a lot of wide receiver names to come up, especially with the new coaching staff.
Yeah, and I like the fact of Coach Keith Williams. Again, he's going to be somebody that's, from what I've been told and understand, he's going to be more reminiscent of Curtis Johnson. I think he's going to bring a lot of tough love elements to the table for this team, and it's going to really help mature these young wide receivers. And so, look, he had Odell Beckham Jr., he had Zay Flowers in Baltimore. I mean, the guy's been around, so I really like that addition. I like the fact that, he's going to be somebody that can help maybe unlock the next level for these receivers, and they're going to need it, right? I think that at times, nothing against Cody Burns. I think he did a fantastic job. But when you look at moving to this new offense, they're going to need these receivers to grow up really quick in a short amount of time.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you saw some of the miscommunication that was taking place,
Yeah.
between, wide receivers and quarterback. And I think that, like, Keith Williams comes in with this really unique sort of perspective because he was the wide receiver coach at Fresno State while Derek Carr was at Fresno State. So he knows a little bit about how Derek Carr's brain works already. He knows how to translate that to the wide receiver position. And perhaps even more importantly, knows how to translate what the wide receivers need back to Derek Carr as well. So maybe opening those lines of communication a little bit better, making sure that everybody's on the same page, especially with a new offensive system coming in, which I think levels the playing field a little bit. everyone's coming in learning something new, as opposed to some people learning something that some people have known for maybe 1 year or something like that. Like, just kind of levels the playing field a little bit. And so I think that there's some kind of hidden value that comes with that. We talk about hidden production in the NFL all the time. I think there's some hidden production that comes with, honestly, not only Keith Williams, but also Denarius McGee, who they're also bringing in as the assistant wide receivers coach from the Houston Texans. And correct me if I'm wrong, John, but we haven't really seen like an assistant wide receivers coach by title in New Orleans for at least a little while. And so that's a whole other, example of really wanting to build up that wide receiver room and giving it the coaching support that it needs. And maybe a little bit more of a veteran presence over the course of free agency might be something that they want to go after as well. Obviously, everyone's always going to talk about Hunter Renfrow in that situation, but there's other guys that could potentially come in and help out there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you look at the Texans receivers position. I mean, they got a lot of talent over there. I love Nico Collins. He was one of my favorites out there, but obviously Tank Dell is out there. They got a whole bunch of talent. And so, again, I like the fact that they're going to try to unlock this offense and take some chances, it feels like, right? I think they've assembled a staff that they feel is mixed with the kind of new and the old, if you will. And no offense to, guys like Rick Dennison, who's been around, or John Benton, but that's kind of the by design for him. And Clancy Barone is a seasoned, not old, but seasoned is what I would say. That's more fair to them, right? And have a long track history. And again, you look at receiver is obviously an important position. You kind of talked about offensive line. Ryan Ramczyk, we learned, obviously had a minor procedure on his knee. And then the key word there is it was minor. It wasn't major, and he's expected to be ready for training camp. So that's actually a really positive thing. And, we talked about it on the show, saying that we knew that, the outlook was good, that we heard it from Mickey, we heard it from Dennis, that they felt really good about Ramczyk and his future. He felt really good about his future, but this kind of solidifies it. And going into training camp, they're only going to be without, presumably, Nephi Sewell because of that ACL injury.
It's huge.
That's encouraging. And the fact that they also are very high on some of these younger guys that they have, the Nick Saldivaris, the Landon Young, and Trevor Penning, before we get too crazy, it doesn't sound like he's going to be changing his position. So Ramczyk in, that's a good thing. Penning, they still believe a lot in him. It sounds like he's going to stick at left tackle, and then they're going to kind of go through this process and see. But, all of a sudden, couple that with Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, now, and Pete might become a free agent. He's probably going to get left tackle money the way he played. But this offensive line may be a little bit better of a picture and outlook than maybe what we thought before.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing now that you're kind of asking a question about is who's at left guard, right? Does James Hurst come back? Does Nick Saldivari step into that role? I think a lot of people kind of forget about him a bit. Some folks kind of think about him as a tackle, but they really like him on the interior in the NFL, especially at his size, arm length, stuff like that. Like maybe Nick Saldivari is the guy that steps up into that role and earns that role. So I would expect the Saints to want to bring in depth and competition along the offensive line, but maybe there's a lot of this that, just like the Saints grabbed this sort of, Kyle Shanahan, or I don't want to call it the Kyle Shanahan system. It's really the Shanahan Kubiak system. But like they go and grab this and then bring it here to New Orleans, not just because it's good. It's a good fit at maximizing Derek Carr, but maybe there's a lot of it that maximizes the talent that they already have on the offensive line as well, which is really good. And so I think that that's one of those things that opens up the potential for an early wide receiver or something like that, maybe in the draft, something that maybe we haven't really looked at a ton. But if you want a good possession wide receiver, you could get a pretty good one in this year's draft, especially at 14. So they're out there. You can get one at 45, even if you wanted to. So I think it's going to be, Brian Thomas Jr., somebody just mentioned, like, that's a really good option, and I know he's an LSU Tiger. I'm sorry. I did the thing I'm not supposed to do. I did the forbidden thing. I said the LSU guy. But I mean, just looking at those prototypes, like, they exist in this year's draft. I'll put it that way. And so if you're feeling really good about Ryan Ramczyk as an organization, which I think the three things that if you mold them together, or the two things if you put them together that are really important, you mentioned the minor knee surgery, not major knee surgery, and the fact that everyone except for Nephi Sewell is expected to be ready at training camp. That kind of identifies that maybe there's no other surgeries kind of in the way, just based on like connecting those two dots. So that could be a good thing too. And so if you're still wondering about what's in store for Ryan Ramczyk, it looks like just recovery and then going back to training camp, which would be great. And then I think that there's levels around Trevor Penning that, like, if the big thing about him was his aggression, his ability in the run game, then maybe a wide zone offense is kind of perfect for him. Do you know what I mean? And an offense that gets the ball out of the hands of the quarterback quickly. That's good for any offensive lineman. So it could mean that you take the need at offensive tackle and start to retrain yourself to think about it as depth and development as opposed to a fresh new starter. And then it opens up a world of possibilities for you at picks 14 and 45, I'd imagine.
Yeah, the world could be your oyster, right? And you look at, you talked about veteran offensive linemen that potentially, like, they brought in Trey Turner last year. It was unfortunate he got hurt, but at the time that looked really good, and then obviously they brought in Cam Irving later. They had Max Garcia, and these guys ended up playing a lot of football for this team, whether it was unexpected or not. But again, I think offensive line, you look at it, and Hurst is actually under contract. I know there's some like crazy stuff on Spotrac that was like saying he wasn't, but we talked to him at the end of the year, and he's like, if I'm not under contract, I'm going to be surprised.
He's like, that's news to me, man.
Yeah, right. So it's like, I guess you look at it, that it could still be the same offensive line of what they thought it was going to be this year, but still, I like the fact that when you look at it, you still have to look at the offensive line and address some of the position. They could do that in free agency. It's not going to be the big ones. There's going to be big names out there. I mean, Tyron Smith just got released, or is going to get released. There's going to be all these players, whether they're older veterans or the contracts are just too much. There is going to be a lot of player movement. And I get on my soapbox when I talk about these mock drafts. This is why I don't go heavy in the mock draft, is because so many things change. And this is one of them. So it's like a guy that you didn't really expect to be available. Now all of a sudden he is. And of course, other teams are going to be competing for him. But if you have a very saturated tackle market all of a sudden, then that bodes well for a Saints team. And of course, the cap should go up next year. It should keep going up. I mean, they expect it to be kind of a steady incline as they try to make up some of this stuff from COVID and all that, but it could work, right? And I think, again, you look at putting the pieces to the puzzle and the way they feel about the depth. And again, is it going to work? We don't know, because it's a new offensive line coach. That's a lot of things to do, but they do believe in Trevor Penning. They believe that they can put him in any offensive scheme and it will work. And of course, he's a guy that I think needs to just get his confidence back a little bit, right? And so this is a crucial year for him. We've talked about him for sure. Getting Ramczyk back is going to be huge. Obviously, Ruiz and McCoy. I think this system is going to help them out a good bit too. And then at left guard, you might have Hurst. Now, I think that they can look at, again, like you said, Saldivari is a potential person that they could look inside. Guys like Mark Evans, what we kind of forget on the practice squad, maybe he can push himself and make something of himself. We talked about Landon Young. He's super intelligent, and he's just keeps getting better and better, I feel like.
I can't wait for him to coach someday, man. I'm not trying to speed past his college career, but he's gonna. His NFL career. But man, he's gonna be a wild good coach someday if he decides to go that route, or maybe a really good analyst. I don't know. Come on the show, Landon. Come talk to us. Yeah,
exactly. We'll go track him down at some point. I know he's at home with his little boy and just enjoying that. So, but sticking with the offense, there's been a lot of speculation about what the future holds for Taysom Hill, Alvin Kamara. One of the things that we also learned, they're in the plans for 2024. Yeah. It doesn't sound like the Saints are trying to trade either of them. We talked about Kamara on the show before. I think it was last week. We were talking about the HBCU combine. Yep. He was out there, but that's huge because people make stuff about Taysom Hill's contract, but of course they don't realize that he plays the personal protector on punt coverage, or he plays a tight end, he plays quarterback, he plays running back, he plays all these different positions. So I think that's kind of where they value him as far as his contract goes. But it's interesting because we could sit here and say that Kamara wasn't going to be a part of these plans, or Jamal Williams is going to be a part of the plans. He's another one. He sounds like he's going to be in the plans too, in the mix. But that's huge to get Taysom Hill and Alvin Kamara going in this offense. And I think this offense is going to help unlock some more potential. I think they're going to be a lot smarter when it comes. Yeah, a lot smarter when it comes to using Taysom instead of kind of like what they did last year. And you've talked about that, but huge deal that Taysom Hill and Alvin Kamara should be in the plans for 2024 for this offense.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, give yourself some credit. At least you didn't do what I did the other day and say more smarter. You can you can overdo it if
I
you want
tried,
to.
almost did.
No, I think it's great, man. And like the thing that I love about seeing Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill back in that system, or that I would love about seeing that is that like just the creativity of the system complementing the versatility of the players. And I think that there's been some examples of that not happening over the course of the past couple of years. Like if you watch the NFL Combine and you watch the running back workouts, what was the first route that they worked on? They worked on the angle or Texas route out of the backfield. It was the first thing that they tested with all of these running backs in terms of drills. By the way, New Orleans Saints running back coach Derek Foster was the guy that was working with those on-field drills during the combine as well. So imagine some of the things that he might be teaching this running back room. You got to see a little bit of it at the combine, but it was the first thing that they worked on was running through that. Not too long after that was the screen game and screen game and stuff like that. So it just kind of makes you go, oh, wow, I wonder if we're going to see more of that for those guys. You know what I mean? Not just because it was being taught to those players, but because it is such a staple now for these running backs that you're legitimately testing players to make sure that they could do it as they come in to the professional leagues. But yet, for whatever reason, over the course of the past few years, we haven't seen either of those as often as you would like to see them, or as often as you used to see them in the Saints offense. I think that changes in 2024. And then you see a little bit of a boost that comes with that. And then just the creativity that pairs so well with the versatility, innovation, and creativity that comes with a Taysom Hill. Like, I imagine for any offensive coordinator candidate, like if I was the Saints, if I'm Dennis Allen and I'm interviewing offensive coordinators, I have a picture of Taysom Hill somewhere very indiscreetly displayed, just to remind you that, hey, number 7's on this team and you can do literally anything with him. Like that would have been a part of my sell to an offensive coordinator is we got Taysom Hill, you know what I mean? And so to see an offense, or to see a creative offense come in and then Taysom Hill ship out would have been, I think, a lost opportunity, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So to see him and to sort of hear around Indy that he's like still a part of the plans and things like that, that is, I think, the thing that makes a ton of sense with a new, creative, innovative offensive system coming in.
I mean, it's encouraging. It's encouraging to know that. And look, again, something that's told is that, this new offensive coaching staff, they evaluated Saints players. They actually evaluated the offense, and from everything that was told, it was positive. And so I think that bodes well for what they need. Is that, hey, we don't feel like we got a lot of guys that maybe we have to interchange here. Maybe guys that can work out. And look, I think Taysom Hill needs this season. I think Alvin Kamara needs this season. It's time to unlock more of their potential, because Kamara, he's done what he could. He's battled through injuries. He just hasn't been the same. And then with Taysom Hill, it's just one of those things where you use him, good things happen. And when it's too late in the game and you're using him, it's like, why didn't you do this earlier? It's 3rd and short. Why are you not running a QB power? Why are you not doing this? Why are you not incorporating Taysom throwing the ball more? Why aren't you doing this? And again, he's just a weapon that can be used. And I get people are like, oh, but he's just this, that, and another. But I mean, he was the only Saints player had over a 20-yard run. No running backs did. I mean, that's big. He just is hard to bring down. And so I know he wants to play quarterback. I know that's his obviously ultimate goal, but unfortunately, that's he's found a role. Not say unfortunately, but he's found his role in his niche of what he's able to do in this offense. And look, I don't know. I think it's interesting because they really do like this quarterback room, and I don't think I never say never. I don't know if Jameis will be back. It's still open. It's possible, right? I know Jameis wants to start, but that's also another thing to think about is they could put Taysom in the QB room. I know that they like using him a whole bunch of other spots, but I mean, that's something to keep an eye on. Of course, they're going to need another quarterback, but something to keep an eye on. But again, it's really refreshing to know that this offense, the way it stands, could be unlocked, especially if you don't have to add as many pieces. And again, you look at the glaring ones, wide receiver. Maybe I could also make the case for tight end too. I think actually there's a stronger case to be made for tight end too. But those two, I feel like when you look at the draft and free agency, those are probably the areas that you're going to have to look at for this team.
Yeah, I did a show on Locked On yesterday on Saturday that was like the Saints might not have a tight end need, but they have a Penn State tight end Theo Johnson need, I'm all in on this dude. I have been for a little while, but then after seeing him at the combine, obviously his testing numbers were great, but watching him like drive the sled, watching him run the routes, watching him run the gauntlet, all these other things, like seeing the on-field drills, I think tells you a lot about these players and their abilities. I love now that they added, if you're watching the telecast, you can see like the miles per hour. Sorry for international viewers, but the miles per hour that, they get to as they go through and everything like that. And I think that just gives you so much more understanding of like game speed and things like that, how quickly somebody can jump from 11 miles an hour to 17 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour in the matter of 2 catches, and turning your body and all these other things, like all these pieces. So yeah, no, I think tight end is a spot that you are probably looking for some more talent. Let me not say that way. Let me say it this way. I think you're definitely looking for more talent at tight end, because right now you've only got a pair of guys, right? You got Jawan Johnson, you got Foster Moreau, but then who are your other guys that you're bringing in to compete? So you could find some undrafted guys. Tip Ryman out of Illinois might be a late round undrafted guy. There's another kid out of Arizona that looks really good as well. There's the tight end Wiley coming out of TC. Like there's a bunch of these guys that are going to be like later round draft picks that you might be able to roll around to in the post-draft process of undrafted free agency, much like Lucas Kroll a couple of years ago, which they had a lot of high hopes for, but unfortunately just couldn't find his way onto the roster, and then, found his way back to Sean Payton over in Denver for a bit. So, or not for a bit, but he finished the season there. I think he's on contract for 2024 there as well. So I think the tight end's a place where I wouldn't be surprised to see the Saints go. I don't think that they go there super early. I think that that's maybe they trade up into the 3rd or 4th, or they wait at the 5th to sort of figure out like who's there. I have a really hard time seeing this, like imagining this team sit through rounds 3 and 4 without doing something, you know what I mean? But especially with all those compensatory selections, but I do think that there's a lot of opportunity in this tight end class to sit back and wait and still be able to bring in somebody that could easily be your 3rd tight end for his rookie season and then maybe develop into more.
Great segue. You actually stole a little bit of my thunder, which is not a bad thing. So we got those wavelengths that are going there. And so I was thinking that too, because at 14 and 45, again, that's the 2 picks you have, and then you're not going to have anything for a while, right? They're projected to have at least 3 compensatory picks, and those look like they're going to be 5th rounders. And so that was Davenport, it was Onyemata, and Caden Ellis. Those are the 3. Yeah. So those are 3 that they're projected to get compensatory picks for. So again, they could use those. It's more ammo to trade up. But transitioning a little, trading, obviously, Marshon Lattimore is a big topic of conversation right now. Huge topic of conversation. He's somebody that I think the door's open to potentially trade, right? And I but it feels like it could be either way, and that they would love to have Marshon here, but also it could be that they trade him away. And so that opens the door. Guys like Isaac Yadam, they definitely want to re-sign him. They feel like he's found a good home for sure. And we'll get to the safety spot in a minute too and talk about Marcus Maye. But Lattimore conversation, potentially trade. Do you like the fact of saying let's trade a guy like Marshon Lattimore, knowing what he brings to the table to maybe get some extra draft picks on maybe rounds 2, 3, 4? Do you like that? And, should they keep Marshon?
I think you keep Marshon. And look, that's me looking at on-field production when he's healthy. I know he's had some injury stuff, but they've all been weird injury things. He got rolled up on last year. It was a lacerated kidney the year before that. Like, how do you prepare yourself? How do you prepare your body for a lacerated kidney? You don't, right? Like, you simply don't. And so, like, there's just those things that I don't really feel, I see a lot of people sometimes try to throw the injury prone tag onto Marshon Lattimore. And I don't think that that's fair. I don't think that that's accurate. What's the value that you can get back for him? I think has to be a heavy part of the conversation. Do you really give up your top cornerback to fill out some mid-round picks? I don't know. Do you wait and then trade him for picks for next year? That way you get the higher value picks because you're trading a year in advance. I think that's one of the reasons why you saw when they did that option bonus, the option bonus doesn't set in until a week before the season starts, meaning that they don't have to trade for this year's draft picks. They would be able to build out their secondary, get a look at it all throughout training camp, and then potentially make a decision after that, and then trade for picks where they would get higher value a year from now. So that's a route that they could go. I have always sort of been on the side of don't trade Marshon Lattimore. But obviously, like, these coaches, these players, like, they know more things than we know. And so maybe there's a reason to move on that's beyond what we comprehend and what we understand. But I think it's got to be something like that, and really, really good value in order for you to really be willing to trade a player of his caliber. Otherwise, I think you keep him and then you continue to roll through with a really, really solid secondary. But look, this is a secondary heavy coaching staff. They can get good play out of their secondary, things like that. So I'm with you. I can see this going either way, but I will say that I'm a little bit more 50-50 on it, where, when they made the adjustment to the contract, I might've been like 25-75 in favor that he was going to be traded. But now, like, with the adjustments to the salary cap coming in higher than it was before, no matter what happens, that option bonus becomes money that has to be spent one way or another. Maybe that's something that, a $13 million boost in the salary cap over the projections, a $13 million option bonus. Maybe that's just something that you say, all right, well, we got it, so let's do it. I think, like, everything has to be right in order for you to really agree to moving on from Marshon Lattimore. Otherwise, I'm on the don't move Marshon train.
No question about the talent. I mean, when he's on the field, he can take away half of the field just by himself.
Right.
That just how good he is. And I think one of the biggest things that, again, we understand about this team going forward is since they addressed this team at the end of the year, it's kind of, you're either all in or you're not, right?
Yeah, you're in or you're out.
Marshon is a guy that I think can be all in for sure. And I think he definitely would want to be here. Again, it's just kind of like the AK thing. You got sick of losing. This is 2 years now where he got hurt because of friendly fire. That's not his fault. Again, he was playing out of position in that Seattle game. He was trying to make something against the.
He shouldn't even been anywhere near that play, man. Like,
no. And so again, that's why I'm like you. I hate when it's injury prone or injury bug, when it's stuff like that. It's not really beyond his control in some aspects, but again, I think regardless, and we talked about it too, regardless of what happens, I think they got to bring back Isaac Yiadom.
Yeah.
I don't think people give Paulson Adebo enough credit for his year. I mean, what a big jump he had for somebody who, again, last year training camp, people wanted this guy off the team. Like, I was like, I don't get that. And he was hurt. He came back against the Vikings in London and all that. I mean, he just had a tough time battling through injuries, but he grew up in a big way for this team. And, Alante, if they don't have Marshon in the mix, Alante could go back outside. It's not his position at the slot is set in stone.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that you look at if you say, okay, if the Saints do trade Marshon Lattimore, like, Alante Taylor has played incredibly well on the outside. He's played significantly better on the outside than he has on the inside. That's a shot at Alante. It's just he's learning a new position on the inside, so that's the way that it should be in the first place. Like, even if he played well in the slot, and even when he did play well in the slot, he's still playing better on the outside because that's his bread and butter. Like, that's what he's played. Like, when he was at Tennessee, he didn't play on the inside. It's not something that he had experience, or at least enough experience doing, that you would say, oh yeah, of course he's a candidate to move towards the inside. That's why I was so anti the idea before the season began. And so, that is the one thing that you can look at and go, okay, well, it does put Alante Taylor in his best spot. You get a younger corner out there, a guy that you invested, an early pick in, a second round pick in. And so it gives you an opportunity to be out there ahead of the times where Marshon Lattimore hits that dreaded 30-year-old age, as somebody that is well beyond my 30-year-old age. I hate saying that. But it's just one of those things where, like, there is the business side of the game. Like, and that's where the return on the trade becomes more important than anything else. Because if you can get the right return for him, second round pick, something like that, knowing that you drafted him in the first round, I don't think you can truly expect a first round pick back. I think that's unreasonable. Or let me say unlikely. You can ask for it, but it seems unlikely. Although we saw it with, Brandon Cooks for years over and over and over again. So what do I know? But, if you can get at least that second round pick and no lower, then okay, all of a sudden things maybe feel a little bit more like, okay, sure. There's return on the investment there. And then you're able to get Alante Taylor back on the outside. You've got Isaac Yiadom that you can move around. Then you just have to address the slot, because you've moved on from, now it would be 3 years. It would be a fourth year in a row with a new starter in the slot, which could be something just to watch out for. But is that rotating door in the slot a bigger issue than not having your best player on the outside? I don't think so, right? So you'll take that. So as long as the return makes sense and, all these other things happen, then sure. But I don't know. It just doesn't feel like the right move to me right now.
And it's important to remember this is not like a CJ Gardner-Johnson trade scenario,
Right.
because that was completely different than what it is, because Marshon's under contract. Gardner-Johnson, that was a contract issue, all those types of things. And so, again, take that with what you will, make of it what you will. But I think you look at also the slot. I mean, I'm in favor of getting a guy like Ugo Amadi back in the mix too. I think he was somebody that's familiar there. He obviously played for Alante, so if they do move on from Marshon, you could still re-sign Yadam, put Alante back out there. You have some insurance with Amadi, or they just look at maybe drafting somebody too. But I think they'll be okay so long as they have a vision, and that actual plan might come to fruition, sooner rather than later. Maybe it's just something we're not seeing, but based off the information, it sounds like their secondary could be a strong suit. Now, switching to the safety spot, something we're really not surprised about is Marcus Maye is going to be out of the picture. Now, we knew about this at the Senior Bowl, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we learned about this possibility at Senior Bowl. This is not really new information. We've wrote plenty about it. It makes sense financially. I think the biggest thing is, were they doing it, as a post-June 1st cut, because they're going to save a lot more money versus what they're going to do if they cut them outright, before the new league year. And I think financially it would make more sense, obviously, to just wait it out and do the post-June 1st cut, because you also mentioned the Saints getting those free agents around June too. You might have to, an ace up your sleeve or something like that. But now this opens a door. They really like Jordan Howden. We know that. They really like the idea of bringing back Jonathan Abram. Lonnie Johnson Jr. is another one they can bring back, and they got Tyron there. JT Gray is more of your reserve guy, and he's more known for your special teams. So with Marcus Maye out of the picture, not surprising, he only played in half the games for the Saints. Do you think that the answer is a Jordan Howden, or do you turn to Jonathan Abram and let him and Howden presumably split some time there, or do you maybe say, maybe we even go with the wild card, and Lonnie Johnson Jr. is a guy that could play deep for him? They can play a lot of different ways. They can mix it up, especially with Tyron being a little bit versatile too.
Yeah. That the fact that Tyron is so versatile helps you out a ton, because what you could do effectively is change Tyron's role to operating a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage, and then have Jordan Howden go in to play to his strength, which is being a little bit of more of a deep safety, or what they call in the NFL a post safety. Same thing could happen with Lonnie Johnson Jr. They see him as a further away from the line of scrimmage kind of guy. But Jonathan Abram makes a ton of sense. He played there extremely well the last 2 games of the season. And that's based on his play and also his communication with Tyrann Mathieu. I've heard some things in talking to some people that, like, the communication that took place, like forget all of the play, forget the production, forget the takeaways, things like that. Just the communication that took place between those 2 safeties during those 2 games was on another level from where the team had been throughout the season beforehand, Marcus Maye or Jordan Howden. And I think that becomes really important, because defensive wise, and I've asked a lot of players, we're going to do some pieces around this over the course of the offseason, but like, what do fans need to know about each position? One of the big things you hear about when it comes to safeties is communication and their ability to be able to communicate with one another. So if that was such a not a deciding factor, but if that was an element that was so elevated with Jonathan Abram there, I think that makes a ton of sense. You can be surprised by maybe some of these guys that could potentially hit free agency, Darnell Savage, some of these others that could be out there and maybe entice the Saints. They've met with a couple of box safeties from the Shrine Bowl. Mark Perry coming out of TCU. They actually met with him twice in Frisco, which is a little bit, that's not usual for players and teams. So there might be a reason that happened, or it just could be interest driven. And then Trey Taylor, another one from Air Force, was a guy that they really liked, or not really liked. I don't know that, but they visited with, at least in Frisco. Taylor did say that his visits with all teams, including the New Orleans Saints, went well in a recent interview. So I'll imagine that things went well there. But I mean, between the draft, free agency, and then most importantly, outgoing free agents that they could keep here in New Orleans that have been otherwise journeymen or on the verge of becoming journeymen, makes a lot of sense to maybe keep them around. So I think the Saints really have the opportunity to be able to address this one in-house and then bring in competition. And then no matter what, either you've got really good depth, but no matter what, you figured out who defense has the ability to improve because of that. If nothing else, consistently getting the pair of players you want on the field, that safety on the field, that in and of itself has an inherent boost versus 17 games over the last 2 seasons that you saw Marcus Maye on the field.
They're not going to get him, but Kevin Byard's another one that's available. That's one I like a lot. I loved him in with the Titans, but there's so many possibilities because of this time of year that so many players are going to become available. It's just going to be that. I mean, NFL is not for long, and average career spans 3 years. It's just one of those things where they're going to have to see what develops. Obviously, the big things are going to be the top tier free agents. Your Danielle Hunters, obviously. In the Saints, they would love to go out and sign a pass rusher. I just don't know if they're going to have enough ammo and firepower financially to do it. And of course, they could make it work, but I just don't know if it's going to be ideal for them to do that. But you mentioned the safety spot, Abram. He deserved that start. I mean, he's the guy 100%. They praised that did all this film study every single time in the locker room. He's just pumping into the film room. He's pumping into his tablet. And I think that's what you saw with that communication. There's a lot of that and the fruits of that. And again, Lonnie Johnson, he got that knee injury. It's unfortunate, but you mentioned the communication. I mean, you look at that Falcons game, there were some breakdowns, breakdowns against them in that last game. And that's not just by coincidence. I mean, that's what the importance of having, communication and all that line, because I mean, when they played Baker Mayfield and the Bucs, they shut them down. Like they really did not have a successful game like they thought they would have. And they didn't have Marshon in the mix. And so that's what that good communication is going to do. And again, we've talked about a lot, but Joe Woods and Marcus Robertson, these two guys are instrumental to this secondary. I think Marcus Robertson in particular is extremely undervalued, and it won't surprise me to see him get a bump here in the future. Hopefully not anytime soon, because the Saints really could use him and need him. But man, he's just somebody, a piece of the puzzle that, you look at. Obviously, they had Aaron Glenn at one point. They move on from Glenn, or will not move on, but Glenn takes the DC spot in Detroit. They had Chris Richard, who was excellent as well. And then, Woods and Robertson. They're proven to be a really, really good tandem here.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be. I unfortunately don't think it's going to be very long before we're talking about defensive coordinator Marcus Robertson somewhere, and that can be to the Saints' detriment, of course. But I mean, you mentioned their run of secondary coaches or coaches that work with the secondary. It's been phenomenal. I mean, not a lot of teams get to go through a run like that, of Aaron Glenn to Chris Richard to Marcus Robertson and Joe Woods. And then you've got Dennis Allen, who's one of the better secondary minds in the NFL as well. I mean, like, it's remarkable to have that kind of a run. So I don't think it's going to be very long before we're talking about that. I'm hoping there's at least another couple of years of Emrov in New Orleans, because he's made a big old impact there. I mean, you look at the boost of 11 additional interceptions from 2023 or 2022 to 2023, like
pass breakups too.
Pass breakups, all of that, right?
3 in the top 10.
Yep. And then we talked about, Paul Adebo's step forward. We talked about Isaac Yiadom finding a home, like finding a spot where it makes sense for him and all that. And I mean, you've just seen it over and over again, like how good the secondary can be with these guys. So I'm really excited for a year 2 of all of that here in 2024, and or another year 2 of that in 2024, and seeing how they continue to outfit the secondary with talented players, because it was the strength of their team last year. And I mean, the team, offense and defense, I would say that, and it's measuring up to be another strength, even without Marcus Maye. I think it's still measuring up to be the strongest portion of this team going into free agency.
Yeah, and you look at it, I agree. I think this is a stacked secondary, and I love it, because if you go to track history and some of the secondaries the Saints have had, I mean, if you go too far back, you're going to probably vomit a little bit, because I'm thinking, like, who are these guys? And that's kind of the boat the Saints were in. And so, again, I know their philosophy on offense is much like what they did with the defense, with DA kind of coming in and starting to retool and build and kind of build it from the ground up. They see that same type of, I guess, strategy offensively is what they want to go for. Now, I think one of the areas defensively that, again, we don't talk about, because we talked about pass rusher, we talked about the interior, talk about the secondary. Let's talk about linebacker. I think that when you look at it, a guy that Zach Bond's a free agent. That's a possible re-signing that they could have, and he plays more that strong side. But right now, they're not going to have one there. Nephi Sewell, he's got the ACL injury. So really, you have Demario, you have Pete Werner, and you got a couple other guys behind them. Some future guys like Anthony Ori and such. And so
DeMarco Jackson.
DeMarco Jackson, the other one. And so I can't forget DeMarco. He's somebody that is really good on special teams, and he's learning a lot more too. Again, I think looking at that position, I think that might be the weakest one on the roster in terms of depth and outlook. And do you think that they may look at free agency? I mean, guys like Andrew Dowell, they could re-sign him. Ty Summers, they could re-sign them. I wouldn't rule that out. Ryan Connolly's a street free agent. They could get depth, but do you think that's quite the impact they need, or do they need to try to get some upgrades there? And then here's the other question. Is it time to look at a Demario replacement?
Yeah, the thing that makes this so tricky is like you kind of for the way that the Saints build out their linebackers, you kind of have to go to free agency this year.
Yeah.
You can go to the draft and maybe take a late swing at a guy or something like that, or if you really wanted to. I mean, look, if you feel really good about your offensive line, let's say you address possession receiver in the first round, like let's say that's the route they decide to go. And then comes around to 45 and a Peyton Wilson from North Carolina State is on the board, or an Edrin Cooper from me too. He's my top guy. He's my top guy at the position. An Edrin Cooper out of Texas A&M is on the board or something like that. Then yeah, maybe you find yourself your future Demario. I do think you have to start looking for that. Unless you think it's Pete Werner, then you're looking for your future Pete Werner, right? In either case, you're still looking for somebody to be your future starting linebacker. But the problem right now is that linebackers are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller in the NFL draft. Next Gen Stats put out this great graph showing you that like pass rushers and linebackers have just shrunk over the course of the past 4 years. And a lot of that has to do with players getting moved to the offensive side of the football. If they show a little bit of athleticism and size, they get moved to tight end or something like that. Or good coverage linebackers get moved to be these big old safeties like James Williams over in Miami and all that. So there's a lot of these examples out there. But I think the thing that the reason why I highlight that is that like the Saints like big linebackers. They want their 6'3", 240, 250 pound, downhill thumpers. Like those are the types of guys that they want. And I don't know that you're going to find that many. There's like less than a handful in this year's draft. So you got to go early there. So if you're looking for like your strong side linebacker, that is even got to be kind of bigger, quicker, all these other things, then you probably have to go free agency for that. I think you'd love to keep Zach Bond here in New Orleans, but I think teams like the Eagles in particular, and some other teams might be like super ready to pay a guy like him. The Eagles just lost, Hassan Reddick and all that. So I think that's a guy that fits that mold. And so it's going to be tough to keep him here in New Orleans, but that would certainly make everything better, but this feels like this could be another Caden Ellis situation. We want to keep him, but he's going to get better money to play a larger role somewhere else. And that's hard to pass up if you're the player.
Yeah, it's kind of something I've been talking about. It's 3-4 teams going to look at him and say, hey, come in here, know what you can do as a pass rusher and stuff and be able to use that. I think that's a possibility, distinct one. And I think the Saints, obviously, they're not going to stick to prototypes when they look at this pass rusher. I think the evolution with Bond is going to make them think a little bit more when it comes to free agency and look at that. And so I think with Demario looking at that, it almost reminds me of the Drew talk. It's like, this is the last year for Drew. This is the last year for Drew. This is the last year for Drew. And he kept playing pretty well. I mean, towards the end, obviously he wasn't playing as effective, but Demario's still playing at a really high level. And look, guys, I don't want to play favorites anything, but if you haven't checked out NOF's, expose on Demario Davis and the way he takes care of his body, go check that out. Because insane. You think about how a player is able to play long, and Demario wants to play long. The way he goes through a routine to get ready to play on the field and all the things that he does is insane. I went up to him afterwards and I saw it and I was like, man, I had no idea. He's like, man, no, not many do. And it's just a testament to what he's able to do on the field. And I think he's still making plays, and obviously he's the heart and soul of this defense. Again, he is. And I see this year being where you say this is his last year, maybe, but I think that you start looking at that conversation and say, okay, have we identified somebody on the roster? If not, can we look at somebody, maybe one of those day 3 picks? You can mold them, because Michael Hodges, he's instrumental to this too. he got courted a little bit this offseason. I think he's another one that you look at from a defensive staff perspective. I don't know if he's going to survive this next offseason as, not getting a bump in a coaching position.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so interesting too, because we saw this happen for years and years and years with Sean Payton too, to where,
Yeah.
the offense looked incredible and everybody kind of went, oh, well, Coach CJ might be heading somewhere else, or he's getting interest from this player, that place. Coach JT Joel Thomas, before he went to the Giants, he was up for the head coaching job at his alma mater at Idaho and all these other things. And then those hirings just never happened. So maybe there's another situation like that goes down, but certainly, you hope for advancement for these guys, Michael Hodges, Marcus Robertson, and there's going to be more of that along the way. Andrew Janocko is the new quarterbacks coach in New Orleans. Like, he could be a guy that ends up becoming a candidate somewhere in the coming years and all that. Like, I think we're finally about to see kind of the coaching tree thing really finally start to branch from the New Orleans Saints in a way that we haven't seen before, based upon just the talent and elevation that we've seen from these players, especially if it starts to happen on the offensive side, which is what everybody wants in the NFL. But on the defensive side, like, it's absolutely there.
Yeah, and you hope that it translates to wins, right? Like, that's all people in New Orleans care about. Just put a winning season together. Just get back in the postseason. Start there, and I think this is a potential to do it. I like the moves, and of course, on paper it looks good. It still has to be executed. It still has to come together, and we don't know what free agency is. But again, it is super exciting at the concept, the thought of them not really doing the same thing, if you will. And so, again, we'll find out sooner rather than later, I guess you could say. And then next week when we talk about on the show, we're going to talk about free agency, because it's going to be right there and stuff. You also talked about the combine. Just one of the other things, new kickoff rule is being kind of toyed with. That's something that you want to take a look at. Darren Rizzi, when they made the kickoff rule change, he didn't really care too much for it, and rightfully so, him and Phil Galliano. But talk about that new kickoff rule a little bit and kind of where things are at with it.
Yeah, there's some interesting things going on. So this really all kind of goes back to Sam Schwartzstein, who kind of helped to create the new kickoff rule in the XFL and getting the opportunity to be able to showcase it there. And the XFL has consistently looked at the NFL and kind of like screamed up going, we'll test things for you and then you can have them. Like, that's kind of always been the thing. That's the value of these spring leagues. And so as the UFL now gets ready to kick off, it's cool that this is now in conversation. So Darren Rizzi was a part of, I think it was, he worked with another special teams coordinator in drafting this, and then it was sort of like 4 special teams coordinators that presented this to the NFL, but a couple of pieces to it. The thing that keeps getting highlighted the most is that you have to declare to the other team that you're planning to do an onside kick, and it's got to be in the fourth quarter, and you've got to be trailing, and that tends to be dominating part of this. But there's a logical reason for it. There's it's kind of a byproduct of a larger conversation. The larger conversation is moving the kickoff closer, not allowing anybody but the returner and the kicker to move until the returner has caught the pass. The kickoff is coming from the 40-yard line on the receiving side, so it's the plus 40. So you're talking about 40, 20, 30-yard kickoffs. So what's the value in that? Okay, so there's a couple of different pieces. First of all, they disincentivize the idea of kicking it through the end zone by, if you do so, it's a touchback for the receiving team starting at the 35-yard line. So now we've severely reduced the field in that case. If you don't kick it 20 yards to at least within the 20-yard line of the returning side, then it's considered an out of bounds kick. So it takes out of bounds and creates a horizontal, or instead of just a horizontal plane for it, creates a vertical plane for it as well down the field, which keeps you from doing things like squib kicks and stuff like that to try to recover the ball with your team being lined up closer. And then it helps with the player safety situation, because on average, kicking off from the opposing side of the field, by the time that the returner touched the ball, typically speaking, returners coverage players, were at about the opposing 40-yard line when the receiving player caught the football. So you're starting relatively in the same area. Now, obviously, if you ran a 4.21 at the combine this year, you're probably at the 35 or something like that. So sorry, you lose 5 yards on your beginning, but it allows you to kind of eliminate the 35-yard run up that was a leading cause, one of the leading causes or concerns in causes when it came to concussions, turns it into a 5-yard run up, which helps a ton with all that. So the byproduct of having to declare the onside kick, as I understand it, is because you have to go back and line up where you originally did for the onside kick, because you're not about the onside kick from the opposing 40-yard line and everything. So that's why the declaration has to be there as a part of it. It's not really about the declaration of the onside kick, which is the first thing that everybody has decided to broadcast this conversation. That is a byproduct of creating a safer kickoff, but also increasing the numbers of kickoffs, where we were talking about 80% of kickoffs last year being touchbacks. They want to flip that.
I hope you guys are taking notes, because there will be a quiz next week when we're on the show, just so we know. But that's a lot. That's a lot of information. Again, they talk about safety, player safety, integrity, all that stuff. And we'll see if it comes true or not. It's one of those that it could happen, it may not happen. And it's just one of those, if they would just adopt some of the things about the rule changes, or with like how they do it in XFL with penalties and other things like that. I mean, I think that would go a lot longer of a way, but we'll see. I think somewhere. It's interesting. Yeah, you got to start small, right? Aim small, miss small, whatever the saying is. Before we get out of here, two big things we really probably hadn't talked about, and well, maybe not one as big thing. So anybody that was confused, the team is definitely going to go to training camp in California. So I know some people were like, it's up in the air. It should happen. It's definitely, they're just kind of waiting on some of the finalized stuff there, but that'll be a good thing. And I think that they really like the idea of getting away. Again, it's been 5 years since they've held training camp somewhere else, and so again, we talked about it on our show. Be sure to check that out last week. We talked plenty about training camp and what that aspect is. But the big thing that we kind of missed is the team met with Jayden Daniels at the combine. Now, everybody just about meets with everybody. Let's preface that. Daniels met with Jeff Ireland. He had a couple meetings with the Saints, and Daniels handled himself really well. I talked a little bit about that, or wrote about it on Saints News, but people are making a big deal about it. And again, you look at 14, you look at the quarterback height, you talk about all that stuff. They're committed to Derek Carr. I've said that. There should be almost no reason that they look at a Jayden Daniels at 14. I don't think he's going to make it to 14. I think the Raiders or the Vikings are going to be a team that makes it. But let's talk about it. The Saints met with Jayden Daniels. What do you make of it? And what is it possible? Is it a feasible thing for them to draft a quarterback even in the first round, even if it's not Jayden Daniels?
Yeah, I don't think it makes sense. I think they have bigger things that they'll want to address, and that they'll want to utilize those draft picks to, like, if you're bringing in this offensive system to maximize Derek Carr, which has kind of felt like that was the goal in the first place, it doesn't make sense to go out and draft his replacement with the best selection that you have possible. Yeah. And so instead you go and you draft to continue to maximize the offensive system that you're hoping will maximize your quarterback. Like the Saints signed Derek Carr to a 4-year deal that was effectively a 3-year deal. We're just going into the second year of that deal. There's no reason to expect the Saints to move on quickly at this point. I've heard a lot of steam. I heard a lot of steam in Indianapolis about Jayden Daniels at 2 to the Washington Commanders as well. I think that's a little bit of like, oh, Cliff Kingsbury runs an air raid system, and Jayden Daniels used to run an air raid system at Arizona State, and people just kind of like molding those things together more than it. That's my speculation around it. But the conversations were happening. We'll see what happens there. But like, there's a lot of those connections that are going to get drawn. But it doesn't make sense to me, if you're the New Orleans Saints, to burn a first, even a second round pick on a quarterback that you don't intend to be your starter. That does not make sense to me. Instead, you're looking in the 5th, 6th rounds, maybe find a guy that you see what happens with later on down the line. And then maybe next year you start to dive into maybe trying to draft a quarterback and things like that. Especially now, like, this feels like a staff that could develop talent for a young quarterback. And so maybe even moving into day 2, moving into the 4th round at the early part of day 3 or something like that could make sense to be able to grab that guy. But I don't think that you run to the podium at 14 or 45 trying to take a swing at a quarterback that may never see the field on his rookie contract.
I'm with you. I just don't like, I understand the philosophy. I think it is important that you do plan for the future. I just don't think that's where this team is at, especially, again, like you said, it's just committed to Carr. Now, if he doesn't play well this year for any reason, then I think maybe you have that conversation and said, okay, maybe next year's draft we do look at drafting a quarterback that's going to sit the bench like a Aaron Rodgers did, or Mahomes, or whatever the case may be, right? I think that's something that you may look at. I don't think that's the pressing priority for this year. And so, you look at the quarterback pool. We forget about Jake Haener, and so Andrew Janocko coming on board. I'm not saying Jake Haener's the future. Don't say. I think Jake Haener is extremely smart. I think he's somebody that could enter the conversation to be that backup if they don't retain Jameis. But again, I think with the Jayden Daniels talk, and it's not just him. Michael Penix is another one too, right? I think that's a big one that people are throwing out, and so I just don't see it this year. And you look at receiver. Free agency, they're not going to get a T. Higgins. They're not going to get a big possession guy. I don't think they're going to have a high-profile guy in that. They could draft one, but again, there's just too many other needs for this team than to go out and say, I want to draft a quarterback at 14. I just don't get it, especially if they traded up in future assets and stuff. It just doesn't make sense. But
Ick. It's all ick. Yeah. The team that I think about is the Detroit Lions last year, right? Like when they landed Jared Goff, for them that wasn't a short-term rental. They really wanted to move forward with Jared Goff. And last year in the 3rd round, they drafted an injured Hendon Hooker that they knew wasn't going to be ready for 2024. So there's 2023. So there's no threat at all to your starting quarterback or anything like that. Like, it was a comfortable situation. I could see the Saints doing something like that end of day 2, early or in day 3. I just don't see them rushing earlier than that. So I just wanted to draw that connection there, because there's kind of a similar situation where everybody looked at that Jared Goff, them getting Jared Goff back in that trade was like, okay, well, they'll roll with him for a year or two and then they'll be ready to move on. Whereas internally, everybody in Detroit was like, no, we think we can win with Jared Goff. The New Orleans Saints look at Derek Carr the same way. They feel that they can win with Derek Carr. So there's no reason to, have the rush here at this point. Now, we mentioned the Drew situation earlier of not having the succession plan in place. You don't want to get that far down that road. But right now, I don't know that this is too late to have that conversation, or that this is too late when it comes to Derek Carr. I think you've got next year's draft for that.
Yeah, it's going to be heartbreaking when people see it like a Sam Darnold or Carson Wentz comes into this team as a backup too. Just going to be. I'm telling you.
Sam Darnold makes a ton of sense because of him spending time in the system. You know what I mean? To just translate it on the sideline. That's all. But I know everybody hates Sam Darnold.
I know. And again, that's assuming Jameis doesn't come back. But man, this time always passes by quickly. And, I'm excited because the new league year is here in 10 days. And then after free agency, we're going to be heavy into the draft. And then after the draft, it's going to be kind of quiet because it won't be quiet for too long because we'll have that rookie mini camp that we'll be able to attend, and the schedule pops, and then soon enough it'll be OTAs, mini camp, and then back in training camp.
Hot heat. Hot heat. No heat.
California heat.
Yes.
Maybe on the beach. Yeah. You'll find Ross and I after every practice at night on the beach. Probably we'll be soaking up some of that Californiaism stuff. So.
Absolutely, we'll be looking for the frozen banana stands over by the chocolate covered banana stands over by Newport Beach. Little Arrested Development action. It'll be nice. It'll be fun. Balboa Island. We're coming. We'll be there.
Okay. There you go. There you go. Well, Ross, obviously, I want to give you a chance too. Anything coming up on Locked On, or anything coming up that you want to plug? Obviously, that would be the time to do it before we get out of here.
Mock draft. John doesn't like the pre-free agency mock drafts, and it makes perfect sense. I completely get it. However, enjoy chaos, and so I'm here. I'm doing a post-combine mock draft on Monday's episode of Locked On Saints. And then, of course, every day after that, a whole new episode, just looking back at things from the combine, drawing connections, getting you ready for free agency, all that good stuff. So right along here with Seconded Saints, Locked On Saints, also putting in work for you to make sure you're all caught up in everything you need to know.
He is Ross Jackson. Look, guys, we really appreciate you tuning in. It means the world to us that you guys support us. And we just kind of started this thing just to see what happens, and everything's been good and kosher so far. So just keep it up. I have to say this. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell your friends about the show. We're going to be on, we are on podcast too. So if you can't catch the live show, we got podcasts, Spotify, Apple, all that stuff. Just search Second and Saints. We're out there. But that's going to do it for us tonight. And we will talk to you. I think we're going to go live next Monday to talk right before the new league year starts. We'll be previewing free agency. I'm sure we'll see some more Saints restructures. We'll get some more information. Then we can kind of go down in some of these hypotheticals. Who could they sign? Who could they bring back? All those types of things. But that's going to do it for us tonight. Guys, appreciate you tuning in. On behalf of Ross Jackson, have a good night.